Sup? That was so sus. Sup? Sup though. Wrong art. Art.
This happened when I was a teenager, many years ago. I was with my best friend Tony, and we were at my house. My parents were gone someplace. I don't remember where. Tony and I had been best friends for many years, and were like brothers.
Right.
We liked to prank our friends a lot, and things like that. On this night that we were hanging out, Tony had the idea to prank phone call one of our friends. This was back before everybody had smartphones. Cell phones were around, but didn't have the capabilities that they do today. So we were going to call our friend Adam, and Tony had a whole joke that he was going to say to him. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was probably really stupid. So we dialed Adam's number on one of the home phones at my house. It rang a few times, and then who we thought was Adam picked up. Tony started going into his joke and wasn't stopping. After he had spoke for like a minute straight, the person on the other end spoke. It was a man, but not Adam. It sounded like an adult, and I think we were about 14. The guy was really mad. I don't recall exactly what he said.
Apparently not that mad, because you listened to that joke for a whole minute. You know how long a minute is? I was going to try to do something for a minute, but a minute is a while. A minute is a long time, especially if you don't got time for the bullshit.
Was asking us who was calling and what was wrong with us and things like that. When we realized that it wasn't Adam, we were both surprised and also embarrassed. Tony just hung up the phone when the guy was still talking.
Jesus.
Then we had a good laugh about it, but we decided not to call Adam anymore. That was enough prank phone calls for us. Instead, we decided to play video games. Just moments after hanging up though, the phone started ringing. We did not have caller ID, so I answered it not knowing who was calling us, although I think we both had a feeling that it might be the guy who we had just accidentally dialed. I picked up the phone and answered. I heard the same guy speaking, and he still sounded angry. I hung up on him, and then he called again right after. This time though, we did not answer the phone. We started playing video games at that point, and over the next 30 minutes or so, the guy called back several more times. At least we assumed that it was him. But each time, we didn't answer and just let it ring. Then, finally, we didn't get any more calls. We continued to game until probably about an hour after the call. That's when there was a knock at the front door.
Hell no!
I was confused when I heard it. I lived in a pretty typical neighborhood, but knocks on the door at night were very unusual. We were in my bedroom, and I left the room and walked out into the living room. I got over to the front door and looked out of the window. Some guy was standing there who I didn't know. He looked right at me as I was looking at him. I moved away from the door, and he knocked again. I went back to my room and told Tony that some guy was there. Then the phone rang again. We were both wondering if there was any possibility that it could be the same guy, so we answered the phone call this time. The man spoke, and he told us to come outside. When I heard that, I instantly hung up the phone again. Now the man must have been calling from his cell phone. He knocked on the door again, and we both went out into the living room. We heard him yell for us to come outside. The guy appeared to be in his 50s maybe, and was wearing a baseball cap and a jacket. That's all I remember about him. We didn't answer the door though. He stayed there for several more minutes before finally leaving. After that, Tony and I were just waiting for the phone to ring again, or for the guy to come back, but thankfully he never did. After that, we never prank phone called anybody else. I think the guy that we called must have had caller ID. He could have looked up our address by finding it in the phone book or something.
Are you serious?
I really don't know, but that's my best guess. It still creeps me out that he actually showed up at my house.
Was it that clocked back in the day? Those phone books, the yellow pages? You can look up anybody's number and their address is right there? Nah. Ain't no way it was like that. Ain't no way. Ain't no way, bruh. Hell nah. Hell. Holy shit.
This took place back in the early 2000s. I'm a female and lived alone in my apartment at the time. I was home by myself one night and received a phone call. I picked it up and answered, but at first didn't hear anything on the other end. I asked if anybody was there, and for a couple of seconds there was still nothing. Then finally a man spoke. I did not recognize the voice as anybody that I knew. He said that he must have the wrong number, and then he hung up. After that, I didn't think much of it. Occasionally phone calls for the wrong number were made. It was certainly a lot more common than it is nowadays. So a few days went by, and then once more I received a call late at night. I picked up the phone saying hello, and I heard nothing. I said hello several more times. Nobody spoke on the other end at all, and I was then hung up on by whoever had called me. The very next night after that, it happened again. By now, I was getting really suspicious. I didn't know what was going on, but it was strange that it kept happening. They would call, and I would answer, and then they wouldn't say anything. It always seemed to happen later at night. It was honestly creeping me out, and I was wondering what was going on. I didn't get any more calls for the rest of that night, though. The next strange thing to happen was not a phone call. I left for work the next morning after the previous call. My drive to work usually took about 15 minutes. Now, I was followed the entire way there. I know that because the street that my apartment was on was really quiet. The next few streets that I would drive on were also usually quiet. So I noticed a car driving behind me, although I couldn't tell who was driving the car. When I got to the highway, I sort of forgot about it and figured that it wasn't going to follow me anymore. The highway had a lot more vehicles on it. I thought maybe it was a coincidence to that point. When I took my exit for work, I noticed the car taking the exit behind me. I drove down a couple more streets, and the car did the same. This had never happened before, and I had a really strong feeling that they were following me intentionally.
I had a pretty strong feeling that, I had that same feeling when the story started.
Now I was getting worried. But literally right before my turn for work, the car went in another direction.
My ass!
I really didn't know what to think about it. After work that night, I drove back home and wasn't followed.
You sure?
That night, I didn't get any phone calls. But the very next night after that, I did. This time, I remember that it was probably about 11 o'clock. The phone rang, and I walked over and picked it up. After answering, I heard a man's voice. He told me that he was my neighbor down the hallway and asked if I could come over real quick.
Sir, how did you get my shits? And why are you calling me at 11 o'clock? I stopped picking up the phone at 9 o'clock. Just saying. Everybody knows this. Everybody. My co-workers, my family, my friends, my side piece. For sure. Right? And everybody in this my neighbors and shit, they know that. I know you know that. Because everybody got to know. I put it on everybody's door. I said, don't call me after 9 o'clock p.m. If you do, I'm finding who called me, and I'm going to hook you up on site. All my neighbors got that note. So I know you got it. So you can come over, but be prepared. I'm beating that ass.
He said he needed some help. Something about it just seemed fishy. I thought that I recognized the voice, but not as a neighbor. And also, I was pretty sure that whoever this was supposed to be did not have my telephone number. I went to the door and looked through my peephole out of curiosity. When I did, I saw a man standing right there on the other side. I was not sure who he was, but I did think he was probably the one behind the strange occurrences. So instead, I dialed 911 and told the police that there was a suspicious man at my apartment. I then got another call from the guy claiming to be my neighbor. I answered it, asking who this neighbor was. He made up some name like Steve or something, I remember. He just kept telling me to come out of my apartment and that it was urgent. I went back over to the door and looked out, and the guy was still there. I told him that I called the cops. When I said this, I watched him turn and then walk away. After that, he didn't come back. The police got there a little while later, and I told them everything that the man had done. Unfortunately, there was not a lot that they could do about it. I decided to change my phone number though. After that, I didn't receive any more calls. I also wasn't followed, and nobody came to my apartment, although I only lived in that apartment for about another month. I never found out who had done it or why. Every time the phone would ring late at night for months, I would worry that it was that man calling. I'm really glad that he didn't though. Something really bizarre happened to me a couple of years ago.
Right.
I got a new cell phone, a new number. I had been needing a new phone for a while, and my previous service was not very good. But after switching over, I soon started to get strange phone calls and texts. The first was a phone call from a number that I didn't recognize. Obviously, I didn't really recognize any of the new numbers after getting the phone, but when I answered, a man spoke and asked me why I hadn't been returning his calls. I realized,
Bitch, I don't know you. What you talking about? Your voice does not sound familiar. I've never heard you before, so that's why. Please get off my line.
he must have the wrong number, and I told him that. But when I did, for some strange reason, he didn't believe me. So after that, I just hung up on him. But sometime later, I received a text message from a different number. This text said something like, "Hey, call me when you get the chance." Once more, I didn't know the number, and I replied asking who it was. They responded with a name I didn't know, and I told them that they had the wrong number. This person did not respond. Over the next week or so, I got at least 10 different text messages and probably 10 phone calls. Most of them were from different phone numbers, but some were the same. I responded to most of them saying wrong number. I realized that most likely the previous person to have my phone number must have not told their contacts that they changed numbers, and they must have had a lot of friends or something. I answered another one of the random calls out of curiosity. It was another man who I didn't know, and I told him that he had the wrong number and I had recently gotten a new one. The man on the other end was saying that he didn't understand. I started to explain to him that I got a new phone and new service, but he then hung up on me. I put up with random texts and sometimes calls for the next few days. Almost everything I just started ignoring. Some people who I had already told them they had the wrong number continued to text me. It was kind of annoying, and I even considered asking to change numbers. Then I got a text from someone who had already texted me multiple times. They said that I needed to cut the crap and nobody was buying my new number nonsense.
What?
Then they said something like, my life could be made miserable if I didn't start cooperating. I read that and I was thinking to myself, who on earth had this number before me? I didn't respond and wasn't really sure what to do. But I received another text saying that they could find me and I couldn't hide forever.
Oh my God.
By this point, most of the threatening texts were coming from 2 or 3 different numbers. And after these sort of texts went on for a few days, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the police, and I also went to get a new phone number. I told the cops my whole situation, and they told me that I should get a new number and they would handle the investigation. So I did get a new number, and after that, I wasn't bothered again. I also never heard anything more about those people though, who they were or anything. I still wonder why I was getting those texts.
Yo, the person before you, like whoever had that number before you, was in some shit. I don't know what they had going on, but I promise you, they was living life on the edge, man. They was, I don't know what they had going on, but it had to be bad. Oh my God.
For a little bit of background, this happened to me in the 1990s.
That's nice.
During this time, I was a single female living by myself in a house. I worked a job that was in an office downtown. The company that I worked for back then was very large and had different offices in the city and around the country. One time, there was a big work party that was taking place at a hotel downtown. It was a pretty big deal, and hundreds of people from multiple offices were invited. When I was there, the first few hours of it were good. I was mingling with other coworkers, and some of my friends from work. Towards the end of the night, though, I was planning on leaving soon, and a man approached me. I was standing off kind of to the side a little, and he walked right up and introduced himself.
Man.
I had seen him earlier at the party, but I didn't recognize him, and he must have worked at another office. I don't remember what his name was, but he was clearly interested in me. But something about him did not sit right with me. He just seemed a little bit strange, and I was also not interested in him. We talked for a little bit, just basic conversation. He told me that he worked at another location, and asked me how I liked my job and stuff. So at the end of the conversation, I said that I was planning on heading out. He asked me if I wanted to share a cab, and I told him no thanks, and that I drove there. At that point, he asked me for my number before I left.
No!
This is something really stupid looking back, but back then when some guys would ask me for my number and I wasn't interested, I would give them a wrong number. It was much easier to do back then.
That's crazy. I ain't think about that shit. I didn't think about, like, when giving somebody the wrong number, that even if you gave somebody a wrong number, that number that you gave them is somebody else's number. That's cluck. Oh my God. I've never thought about that. Like, oh my God. All of these stories that I have reacted to. Giving somebody the wrong number, you're still giving somebody else's number out. That's crazy.
Not everyone had cell phones. I did have a cell phone, but I rarely used it. I would mostly just use my home phone because my cell phone was big and bulky. So I gave this guy a random wrong number. Then I shook his hand and walked away.
Ew.
After that, I stayed at the party for only 5 more minutes or so. I said bye to some of my work friends, and then I headed out. I left the hotel and went to my car parked on the street. Then I drove home. I lived only about 10 minutes away, and my house was right outside of the city. The neighborhood was very busy, and the houses were really close together. I went inside, and only about a minute later, there was a knock on my front door. By now, it was almost 11 o'clock at night, so I knew this was really strange. I walked over to the door and answered it, without even checking to see who was there.
Why?
When I opened up the door, I saw the guy from the party. It was a shock to see him here. I asked him what he was doing, and he seemed pretty angry. He told me that he called my number, and it belonged to a random guy who had no idea who I was. Then he said that he knew I gave him the wrong number, and asked me why I did it. There wasn't much I could say. I just told him I wasn't interested, but that doesn't mean he could follow me home. He said a few more angry things to me, and then started up towards my door. It looked like he was going to try to come inside of my house, and I quickly slammed the door shut. He caught it right before it closed, though, and tried to stop me. I had to practically throw my whole body up against the door to get it to shut. I was finally able to, and then I locked it. He tried opening the door several times, and then started pounding on it. I yelled at him that I was going to call the police. At first, he kept banging on my door. I didn't think anything was going to stop him, and I went over to the phone. But finally, he stopped and then walked away. I watched him leave, and after that night, I never saw him again. I was worried that he would show up randomly sometime or something like that, but he didn't. This was the last time that I ever gave anybody the wrong number.
Oh my God. I mean, I guess that's still better than, not giving a clucky your number, but still, you give somebody a wrong number, that you're still giving somebody else's number out unintentionally. I've never thought about that. That shit is crazy. Oh my God. So let me ask y'all this. You got your phone on you, and it says no caller ID, or it says a phone number, but that's it. Like, the number isn't saved in your phone. Do you pick it up, or do you just let it keep ringing? See, my thing is, I think I said this before. Like, I'm definitely not gonna pick up no caller ID. And then nowadays, because I have an iPhone, nowadays it says spam likely. I'm not gonna pick up that. But then if there's like a random number that calls me, you can call me. You can keep calling me all you want, but I'm not gonna pick up. I'll pick up if you leave a voicemail. But you can call me 10 times in a day. I'm not gonna pick it up. Sorry. That's that, you know. Or you know what I might do? I might call that number back, put myself on mute, and just to see who it is, so they don't hear me. But I'm not just out here just picking up random phone calls. That's how you get caught up. Keep it cool, keep it classy, and I love you. Stay happy. My family.